21st Century Breakdown is the name of the new album. What is the 21st Century Breakdown? What does that mean?
I think like it's a breakdown and sort of like it's sort of a breakdown of what like different issues or different crises that are going on, like personally and also the world around you, and it's also like kind of like having a nervous breakdown also, so it's kind of a double meaning.
Before I start this, I would like to make something abundantly clear. I do not hate Green Day. In fact, just the opposite, I love Green Day, because they're one of my, if not my, top favorite groups of vocalists, guitarists, percussionists, and bassists who can work together expertly and pool their talents to make something much greater than the sum of its parts. I say this to let you know that this rant, this deep analysis is not made out of hate, but out of incredibly tough love for this band. Because when it comes down to it, 21st Century Breakdown is not only my least favorite album by them, but it's the only Green Day album which I consider to be, in any fair metric of the word, bad. The reasons for this are multifold and can be surprisingly complicated, and I had multiple ways to approach making this video when I sat down to write out the outline, and I decided to take this the way that I know how. I'll talk about the album, going track by track, and as I get to a track, I'll discuss several flaws which undermine the entire album, which I feel are first or best exemplified in that individual track. Before this, I'll start off with an outline and introduction to what 21st Century Breakdown is, and by the end I'll hope to recap and state what will hopefully be a firm and understandable thesis. 21st Century Breakdown is adored. It's many people's favorite Green Day album. It's many people's first Green Day album, the one that's special in their hearts, the one that holds a place that no other album will ever be able to take. I hope that you'll hear me out with an open mind. My intention is not to take away your joy from this album, and if you're afraid that I'll do that, I have no qualm if you turn back now and shut the video. I don't want to take away your joy. I just want to explain why I can't find it in this album in the first place.
American Idiot was definitely had political undertones. And does this album also have a political undertones as well?
I think the record is sort of just snapshots of just different issues, whether it's, hypocrisy in religion to, trying to, be working class during a financial crisis, people losing their homes to, self-destruction, and but also trying to hold on to some sort of belief. So, I mean, and that, I think maybe I would, it's kind of...
Green Day's 8th album, 21st Century Breakdown, came out in spring of 2009, following a whopping 5-year break from their previous endeavor, American Idiot. American Idiot was about 50 minutes in length and was a rock opera, telling the story of a character named Jesus of Suburbia, who ran away from what he believed to be a terrible life in suburbia to join the big city and find himself. And there, well, he did find love in what's-her-name. It was ultimately doomed when he met his antithesis, St. Jimmy. Depending on how you look at the album, St. Jimmy is either the part of Jesus of Suburbia, which he is disgusted in but finds himself becoming, or a separate character altogether. American Idiot is incredibly as you see it. The band themselves have never given a specific explanation as to the plot. They want you to take out of it what you'll take out of it. While all the songs come together to paint a pretty solid and followable plot, almost all of the details therein are up to and subjective to the listener. And that's probably why the album was so successful as a rock opera. I go into so much detail about American Idiot because the effects it had on 21st Century Breakdown are apparent throughout the album. 21st Century Breakdown is an even longer rock opera, spanning almost 70 minutes. And its story is even more abstract. We again are given characters, Christian and Gloria, but these characters find themselves in no plot. There is no inciting incident like there was in American Idiot. There is no rising action, climax, falling action, or, most notably, resolution. 21st Century Breakdown is somehow much, much more subjective than American Idiot, so much so to the point that it's not really a rock opera anymore. The best word I can think of to describe it is a concept album. It's set in a time and it's set in a place, and it sort of has characters, but it lacks all the other qualities of a story. 21st Century Breakdown was still wildly popular, though not as much as American Idiot, and went on to, if not relaunch, then to keep Green Day in a very high status among bands at the time. Songs like Know Your Enemy and especially 21 Guns still ruled the radio like American Idiot and lodged themselves in the heads of teenagers of that generation. The history and development of albums is something that's always fascinated me. I love learning about the writing process and what certain things did during creation that helped shape how albums turned out. That's the reason I find documentaries like, to some extent, Heart Like a Hand Grenade, but to more of an extent like Quattro, to be so interesting. However, in trying to find out more about the creation of 21st Century Breakdown, I hit a frustrating roadblock. 21st Century Breakdown's creation began like the creation of Green Day's other albums. They began with throwing shit at the wall and seeing what stuck. A tried and true method for songwriting. In interviews, Armstrong and company describe a tactic in which they took vinyl records, wrote names of eras, a style of music, and settings on them, and then tried to write music around that. Like most albums, these ideas eventually led to one idea which rose above the others. And they liked the vibe from this one song so much that they ended up constructing the later tracks they would write and the entire vibe of the album around it. Now, so far so good. This is typical for how albums are created. But you'll notice that this is all about the early writing. An early writing stage which probably went by pretty quickly in an album which took 5 years to create. Now this obviously leaves a lot of time unaccounted for, and brings me to a statement which I will further explain and back up later in this video. And the statement is this. 21st Century Breakdown is a particularly, in fact shockingly, flawed album, and such flaws in albums can only be created one of two ways. Either the members of the band who were writing it did not give a shit when writing, and threw stuff together without much care, throwing out a product which was undercooked, so to say, or they cared too much, polishing away what made the album good in a chase of perfection which ultimately destroyed the project. I have no doubt that one of these things happened to 21st Century Breakdown, but I have absolutely no idea which is true, and voice lines from interviews send contradicting messages. I want to believe that this album is a result of a chase for perfection, that they reached too far and accidentally destroyed the project, because I like Green Day, and I want to hope the best from them. So I'll try not to be cynical. I'll discuss the flaws in the songs, and I'll lead at to where either of these outcomes could have affected what turned out. If that makes any sense. "21st Century Breakdown," an album almost 70 minutes in length, opens with a 1-minute song, titled Song of the Century. Song of the Century attempts to set the mood for the following album, and it is in so many ways a red flag, a first warning as to the downsides, the flaws in this album. This song is essentially a poem. It's Billie Joe Armstrong's distorted guitar and voice. Sing a song of the century. It goes on like a children's rhyme, something you'd sing on the playground, pointing out abstract and unidentified flaws with modern society. It tries to create an atmosphere without pointing fingers to anything in particular, and is pretty much this album's version of American Idiot, the song, off American Idiot, the album. It's hard for me to say stuff about this song because it's a nothing song. It doesn't do a particularly good job setting the stage, because it tells you almost nothing other than that on this album, Armstrong will use very vague words which could mean almost anything. It doesn't give you an indication for the instrumentation, except that it's overproduced. I mean, really, if you want to understand how overproduced this song, which is supposed to sound distorted, is, take it, put it in Audacity, turn distortion up by 3 or 4, and drop the pitch down by about 0.1, and you'll hear something which sounds a lot closer to what I figured this is supposed to sound like. It's a minute of dead weight which could have and should have been cut off this album, because a 70-minute punk album is absurd. You're asking the listener to sit down for almost twice the average album length. So you have to earn that length. You have to trim so that the album is just as tight as any other album would be. And it's stuff like this which makes this album feel so long and such a chore to listen to if you actually ever sit down and try to listen through it. Of course, like a sneeze into the night, that song passes with no impression, and the real first song of the album starts, the title track, 21st Century Breakdown. I have interesting things to say about this song, because, unlike any of the other songs here, we actually have a demo of it. Now, for those of you who don't know, a demo of the title track, 21st Century Breakdown, was leaked prior to the album's release. And you can listen to it now. It's on YouTube. And it points out interesting changes between how this album began and how it ended up. Here I will play the first 5 seconds of each version of the song. Apart from the production, which is not fair to judge because this allegedly was a demo, and it pretty much sounds like a demo, you may have noticed a difference in style. The original version of the song was written almost as if it was the first. The piano picks up out of nowhere and slowly leads you into something new, whereas in the final version, it's designed to pick up from the opener, which is pointless and does nothing but extend the album and add a theme which can be established and is established in this song anyway. The song is constructed to be sort of a rock opera, not a juggernaut, but something more subtle, more along the lines of a Bohemian Rhapsody. The song starts slow, with a gentle piano before leading into what sounds like more of a typical Green Day song. The lyrics are fun. Born into Nixon, I was raised in hell, a welfare child where the Teamsters dwell. The last one born and the first one to run, my town was blind by refinery sun. These lyrics paint a very clear picture of what I assume to be the character Christian, about his childhood, what he values, and what he's like. That's the stage of being set in modern America and gives us immediate characterization. The chorus is enjoyable, it's catchy, and there's a nice guitar line going through, giving it a more pop-punk edge, which is again lacking in most of the album. And the song comes to the second verse, where some of the flaws of the album start creeping in. The lyrics make a little less sense. I was made of poison and blood, condemnation is what I understood. Video games of the towers fall, Homeland Security could kill us all. It's still enjoyable and paints a picture, but this time it's less about Christian, and I guess more of the world he sees is the way he sees it. Again, I'm assuming this is all Christian and not Gloria. And I assume that because the next part of the song explodes into life. A guitar line reminiscent of a cheesy President's Day commercial dominates the song. The pace picks up, everything gets a lot poppier and a lot punkier. And Billy shouts, "We are the class of 13, born in the era of humility. We are the desperate in the decline, raised by the bastards of 1969. And I assume this is the dialogue, the point of view of the character Gloria. Both because these statements contradict the previous ones, you cannot both be born under Nixon and the class of 13, well, I hope not, because they carry a youthful energy. Armstrong did state something about the characters in interviews. He said that Gloria is optimistic, a youthful trait, while Christian is pessimistic. He wants to see the world burn, which is something associated with older people who have a more aged view on the world. And I assume that Christian is an older man, and Gloria is a younger woman. I'm going so much into the characters here, not because I'm judging this entire album based off of how good of a story it has, or how good the characters are, but because I want to get the point across that this album starts with good characterization, a very catchy and enjoyable song, and high hopes. As the song slows down at the end to a sort of ballad, but blissfully a very short ballad, one cannot hope but be optimistic to what the rest of the album's like. Maybe it'll be slower, more scattered, paying homage to older bands like the Beatles, but still enjoyable, still punky, still Green Day. I am very conflicted on Know Your Enemy. I'm biased in my hindsight because now I've seen the song played not only live, but as the opener to a fantastic 2-hour live show. So looking back and examining this album, I can't help but to let my enjoyment of the energy and crowd sing-along fun this song brings in a live setting creep into how I feel about it in the studio. However, removing it from that joyous live setting, the studio version has more flaws. First off, it's slower than it was played live, and it's slower than it should be. The tempo should be at least a few seconds faster, and it creates the feeling not of a march-along anthem, but of something that's droning along a little too slow. The second thing to notice is that it feels overproduced. Billy's voice, while it sounds kinda weird and squeaky from production on all of this album, is especially noticeable here when he's supposed to be shouting to a crowd. And while the song is supposed to sound badass and loud, kind of thrasher, I guess, the production ultimately undermines it. But the song is a perfect illustration of the vagueness which brings down the entire album and kills off the chance it had of being a rock opera and even a fully fleshed out concept album. "Do you know your enemy?" Armstrong screams. "No, I don't. Who's the enemy?" It's never established, and while that is a meme on Reddit, and you've probably rolled your eyes because you've seen that meme everywhere, it's absolutely true. This shows that Armstrong and company are once again trying to let the listener decide the story for themselves. But in American Idiot, the fundamental themes and attitudes of the story and the characters were laid out before the ambiguity came in. You knew who the Jesus of Suburbia was before he went on his journey with the vague details. You were introduced very clearly to who What's-Her-Name is before their vague relationship. You're introduced very clearly to what kind of person St. Jimmy is before you're left to speculate if he is the Jesus of Suburbia and how he affects the story. And you are left to knowing the conclusions of the relationships with the characters, even if you don't know exactly how it happened. Does Jimmy really die? Does he leave the Jesus of Suburbia's life? It doesn't really matter, and that's up to you. But the point is, the Jesus of Suburbia overcomes St. Jimmy and the effect he has on him by the end. In 21st Century Breakdown, we have this character who feels like he could be Christian, and this character who feels like she could be Gloria, and now they're fighting an enemy with no face. We have absolutely no idea throughout the entire album what actually happens to them, because they have no plot. They kind of have character progression, and I'll get into that later, but not really. The gist. Know Your Enemy is too long, a little too repetitive, and not much goes on in the instrumentation, but it's ultimately enjoyable. And so we roll from a slow opening to a kind of mid-pace title track, to a mid-pace but admittedly booming third track, and now off to the fourth track, where maybe we'll pick up some momentum. Oh my god, now this album's starting to feel long. Viva La Gloria starts with high-pitched, polished, light piano, before Armstrong begins singing in a surprisingly high tone, a ballad, assumably from Christian to Gloria, about how, like What's-Her-Name to Jesus of Suburbia, she is this youthful fire in his heart. I'll quick get out of the way that Gloria is pretty much the same character as What's-Her-Name, and that's not really an issue if that's the direction Green Day wanted to take. But this song is an absolute wrench in the flow that the album was building. We went from a slow song to mid-tempo songs, to a song that starts with a mid-tempo that absolutely kills your interest in it before trying to regain it by getting fast. Now, if you're like me and you're a fan of punk or pop punk, and you have a hard time getting into this album because you don't know what the fuck it's supposed to be, if you take the faster part of this song and you can just get past the mastering and the production, or if you can get it into a program like Audacity and lower the pitch and raise the distortion a little, then you might really enjoy this song, because basically, it's a Green Day song, hidden in polish. It has power chords, it has fast beats, it's catchy. And it's probably the last song like this that we'll hear for the majority of the album. It won't be until the last 15 or so minutes that we'll hear a song like this again. So if you're like me, and that's what you like in music, cherish it now, because it's going to go away for a bit. Guess what, guys? We just went from a song which started slow and subdued, and then got loud, to another song which starts off slow and subdued, and then gets loud, after an opening song which was slow, leading into a second song which was started slow and subdued, before getting loud. Do you notice a trend? Do you see why this would get annoying to me? Now, Before the Lobotomy is not actually a bad song, but it's come in absolutely the worst part of the album. We've already had a start and stop so many times. It's like the album keeps trying to jumpstart, like an old snowmobile or four-wheeler with a pull start. You keep pulling on it, and the engine stutters, and you pull on it, and the engine stutters, and you pull on it, and the engine stutters, until finally you get it rolling. But it's not rolling yet. It's another start. The lyrics here are more interesting and give you something more to chew on than most of the album, and I think that was Armstrong's point. And if you can get meaning out of them, they give you more characterization about the character Christian, although we might be a little late for that, but I'll take it. We find out that Christian feels like he was pretty much born in the wrong era. He longs for the time his family came from, when things were simpler and America embodied what he wants from it, although we don't know what that is. Moving on, we have the second big arena rocker, the Know Your Enemy 2.0, Christian's Inferno. The song starts with what's supposed to be a distorted and angsty guitar, which is absolutely ruined by the mastering, leading through what's supposed to be distorted and almost metal vocals, which are again ruined by the mastering, to an exploding volcano eruption chorus, which is again ruined by the mastering. Now, if you're a fan of, like, stuff that's polished and poppy, then you might not get what I'm coming from here, but anyone who's ever heard hard rock or metal exactly knows what I mean, and they know what this song probably sounded like in its demo. It's just saddening to imagine what this song originally sounded like and could have sounded like, and still would have sounded Green Day, but it was neutered by the mastering. Here we are supposed to learn more about Christian, but thanks to the previous songs, we don't actually learn anything new about him, and we get some biblical analogies to some images relating to Christianity, but they ultimately don't tell us anything and come out as a lot more pointless and meaningless than the stuff in American Idiot. At least when Jesus of Suburbia proclaims that he is the son of rage and love, the Jesus of Suburbia, we learn a lot about how he sees himself, whereas here, learning that Christian sees himself as being in an inferno, we don't ultimately learn anything. Although there is a possibility that the song isn't actually about Christian at all, and it's about actual Christians, but again, it doesn't actually say anything, and does not have any solid arguments against Christianity, so I don't know, is this just like a hate porn track that you throw on when you just want to think, oh, I hate Christians so much, but don't want to give any reason for it, or think about it too hard? And I can already feel the comments telling me why Christians are terrible, and that's not the point. So next we finally have a proper slow song, an entire song that's slow. The lyrics are nice enough, they seem genuine. Apparently Billy wrote it about his wife, and I don't have any direct issues with the song itself, except it's a little cheesy. But the real issue here is that the album was finally starting to build momentum, and this completely destroyed that. I guess in the frame of the album this is supposed to be Christian addressing Gloria again, which is weird because Billy Armstrong himself said that the album's main character is Gloria, but it seems to focus a lot on Christian's point of view. Anyway, it's a nice song. Next we have Christian's Inferno 2, Super Edgy Boogaloo, or what has it's written in the lyric book, East Jesus Nowhere. This song is definitely mocking Christians. Billy Joe Armstrong said he wrote it after going to a friend's, I want to say, baptism, and it's just him venting about how he hates Christianity and mocks Christians and the things they say. Oh, bless me, Lord, for I have sinned. It's been a lifetime since I last got blessed. I threw my crutches, the crutches being Christianity, into a river of a shadow of doubt, doubt being the edginess of being a non-believer. And apart from the heavy-handed symbolism here, it's an enjoyable enough song, except that it's now the third time that a song like this has been written, and there isn't really any distinction between them, except that this one has a kind of show-to feeling. Like, you know, Hitching a Ride kind of sounds like a show tune, and this song kind of goes for something like that a little bit. Anyway, the chorus in this one is finally catchy enough to be called a chorus, unlike the first two where it was pretty much just shouting. One last thing to say about this song is that it is the launching point of the first bout of flow on this album, and the second act, which again, as I said, the acts are kind of pointless. But this song is the launching pad of this album's brief bout of album flow. For those of you who haven't paid much thought to it, think of it like this. An album with good flow is like a smoothly paved road. You can get in and start driving and end up driving a very long distance without it feeling so long, because the drive was so smooth it led you from one place to another without disrupting you, just letting you flow from one song to another. And an album with no or with poor flow is like the shittiest road you've ever driven on. It's filled with potholes. Every song pushes you out of the mental space you're in, and you always just have to get your bearings again. At the start of every song, you don't know what's coming up, and it makes you disoriented, which, for a person who likes to sit back and listen through to an album, is absolute chaos. The song ends with about a static and random clips from, I assume, either radio or TV, before leading into many people's favorite song, and my second least favorite / most hated song off this album, Peacemaker. Now, this next song, the 9th song on the album, is where I will mention something I have not mentioned the entire album, and that is Mike Dirnt and his bass lines. Because on this, the 9th song into a Green Day album, I want to say 20 minutes into this Green Day album, we have the very first song where the bass line is audible. And that's so bizarre and alien to me that it would take this long in a Green Day album to have an audible bass line. I know part of that is a mastering's fault, like it is on, for example, Rev Rad. But I've taken this entire album into Audacity, and I've cranked up the bass. I've dissected it inside and out, trying to figure out if there's a bass line buried in the songs, and most of the time there isn't. We'll get into this more later, but suffice it to say, it's an abnormality for Green Day. Anyway, Peacemaker is a generic song, and incredibly generic. On this song, we get more scattered imagery. They talk about mass shooting or domestic abuse or some crime that has to do with the guns, and in a character who I assume is Christian talks about getting a peacemaker, which is of course probably a handgun, and I guess it also pays allusion to a pacemaker in there, or maybe I did not get that pun correctly. But this song is ultimately, when you boil it down, about nothing except whatever issue with guns you personally have that you can project into it. And there's nothing wrong with projecting yourself into a song. It's what makes some of the most popular songs so popular. But on political issues, where you could have something to say and make your point across, I find it incredibly confusing to be abstract and vague. On Green Day's newest album, Revolution Radio, there's a song about mass shooting called Bang Bang, where there's a character who is impressed by watching ISIS on the internet and stuff, and he decides he wants to be famous. He wants to be just like the mass shooters. So he gets a gun and shoots up a public space, probably his school, and enjoys the 10 seconds of fame that will buy him. In another song off Dookie, a bit more playful, there's a song about mass shooting because Armstrong wants to get revenge on everyone who's did him wrong, and it's played partly comically and edgelord, but also partly serious, like, not that Armstrong will ever shoot a place up, but that he's venting. He's getting out his anger by singing about it. Both of those songs is able to exactly describe what they're about. Peacemaker? I have no idea what it's about. But maybe that's just because I'm an idiot. One more thing about this song to say, and that's the bass line. I can actually verbally sing it to you now. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll get the idea across. The bass line on the song goes dun da da dun 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 da da dun dun. Now stop me if you've heard that bass line before. You have? What song did you hear it in? Oh, you didn't hear it in a song? You heard it as a backtrack in a movie? Or maybe at the end credits of a movie? But you aren't sure which movie. I might be able to help you with that. You see, a long time ago there was this actor named John Wayne. And John Wayne made a lot of cowboy movies. If you ever want to see one of them, just go into your dad's closet, take out that shoebox in the corner, and shift through the VHS tapes. It's going to be one of them, even if the label's worn off. Just pop them all in until you find one. And the thing about these John Wayne movies is that they were all pretty much the same, with a few good ones. Most of them were this mediocre story where John Wayne, a cowboy, would fight other cowboys or desperados or Injuns, and they were all the same cookie-cutter story. And from this cookie-cutter genre of Western, there would be a lot of bad American attempts at recreating Hispanic and Latin music. And from these attempts, there would be a very generic bass line which would be created. And that bass line would go dun da da dun da dun da da dun da dun da da dun 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 da da dun da. And apart from a few good musicians using this bass line, or more often variations of it, for example, Johnny Cash liked to use variations of this bass line, it's been ingrained in popular culture as the Western bass line. And knowing this, Green Day built a song centered around the Western bass line. And it drives me crazy, like John Wayne under a full moon. Of course, every song has its end, and when that song ends, we get to the next song that I actually like on this album, the hit single, Last of the American Girls.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mike Dirnt. She breaks her makeup on like graffiti on the walls of the heartland. She's got a little book of conspiracies right in her hand. She is paranoid, endangered species headed into extinction. She is one of a kind, well, she's the last of the American girls.
It's the second of 3 songs with audible bass lines on the album, and it's the first of 2 songs with good bass lines on the album. Now, the bass line isn't intuitive, but it doesn't have to be. The point is it's catchy and it's satisfying, which is all a bass line really has to be. It fills up the song and is the only glimpse of Mike Dirnt trying on this entire album. Because this is where I come back to that dilemma. I want to believe that this album is a result of trying too hard, but it's hard to believe that when Mike Dirnt isn't on the album. If you had told me that he didn't show up a day in the studio and just sent this bass line in on his phone because he wanted to do one song, I would believe you. If you told me that they just had Jason or some guy off the street come in and do the empty bass lines in the background for the rest of this album, I would totally believe you, because I hear no proof that Mike Dirnt was the one who wrote the bass lines on this album. And that may seem like a nitpick, but for Green Day, it's not. Give me any other Green Day album, even the trilogy albums, and I can find 3 or 4 songs with good bass lines. Not amazing, but good. Bass lines that sounded like they were written by Mike Dirnt. Bass lines which stood out even if the mastering didn't want them to. And those albums are all an average of 12 songs. This album is 18 songs. I'm reaching new levels of whiny here, but maybe you see my point. Aside from Glory Hallelujah finally getting some Mike Dirnt bassline, the song is pretty good. It's a little slow, but when you remove it from the context of the album, it gets a lot better. At this point, we're really far into this really long album, and after so many slow songs, so many mid-tempo songs, so many restarts, a song that's mid-tempo like this, listening through the album can be incredibly grating. But I don't want that to detract from the fact that on its own, in isolation, the song is fine. By this point on the album, we've had a long break from any sort of story or character progression on our supposed characters, Christian and Gloria, but we finally get some more of that here on the next song, Murder City. One of a sort of paired 2, I say paired because they flow very nicely into each other, songs which feel like a couple of the only songs where Green Day had a real spark, a real desire to write something unique and new for this album, even though they do sound a lot like songs from Warning. Murder City seems to continue the story of Gloria. It seems that she is unhappy with this life of crime that she and Christian are pursuing, and is starting to become disillusioned in it. The way she saw the world is beginning to crumble around from her, and she's surprised that neither she nor Christian is able to keep what it was together. In short, she's surprised that she's growing up. It also seems she's becoming disillusioned in her friends and the people they hang around, but the album's given no indication or hint as to who they are or what they're like, so I don't know if that's me reading too much into it. But don't let me detract. This song is fast, it's frantic, it's what I was waiting for so long on this album. And the atmosphere here, the mood is more dour, but it's possibly the only song on the album that I feel nails the dourness. For this entire album, thanks to the mastering and how it's written, it never feels very punk. It certainly never feels very pop punk. It feels more like they're chasing some sort of wise, laid-back, and introspective emo crowd, but I also didn't feel like they did a very good job of that until this song. And while I don't normally care for that vibe, I feel like they do a decent job here. It's frantic, it's chaotic, it's a step back in the right direction. And it leads perfectly into the next song, Viva La Gloria, Little Girl. Viva La Gloria, Little Girl starts with a subdued, melancholy piano, trembling in its reverb, sounding almost like a player piano that's losing its tune. And it carries a very strong Warning vibe. In fact, I've seen comments on YouTube about people asking if 21st Century Breakdown sounded like Warning because of this song. Billy can finally let himself sing in a lower register here, and everything is awash in the type of reverb and distortion that was needed on other songs on the album. Here it continues this apparent story about Gloria, which has arisen out of nowhere. She's further losing her grip, and it seems like in this song, Christian is retaliating against her. That's what I get out of it, that they had a falling out, and now either he's chasing her away because of a fight, or she's lost her faith in him and is running away, trying to start over, which is probably something she's done a lot in her life. The song has great energy and is the only one on the album which actually feels operatic. Operatic? I don't know how the fuck you say it. It sounds like an opera. While traces of blood always follow you home, like mascara tears of your getaway, you're walking on blisters and running with shears, so unholy, sister in faith. The lyrics are still weird here. They don't give a clear picture, but they paint a very clear emotion in Gloria's mind, and maybe an emotion in Christian's mind, if this is him speaking to her. I can't tell if it's a conflict between them or a conflict within herself. But either way, it's pretty much the only song that has any sort of story here. Anyway, we have almost a guitar solo in this song, and the instrumentals are more interesting than most of the rest of the album. And finally, it's time for the song I don't want to talk about. So maybe I won't talk so much about it. I'll just have you listen and look. Restless Heart Syndrome is the same exact song as Give Me Novocaine. Now, it's normal for bands to recycle ideas, recycle flows. Green Day is built off of a very, very simple verse-chorus formula with basic 3 and 4 chord structures. But it's not normal for two songs to sound this similar, especially on two albums back-to-back. They both are about this character in a metaphorical hospital, feeling pain and asking for relief, while the song is slow and dramatic, and that drones on for a few verses and choruses. The vocalist getting a little more intense at the chorus, so getting a little more grandiose, and then slinking back down for the verse until the explosive end. And they're just so the same song. It's so strange to hear a band rip themselves off. People point out how Nickelback has recycled the same slow song like 20 times, and I just get flashbacks to that feeling on this song. It's the worst version of Give Me Novocaine, and it's the biggest irritant to me on this entire album. Here we find ourselves hitting the final repeat of Know Your Enemy, and this one is probably the best version of it on the entire album. They're stomping, it sounds like people are in a bar and a bar fight's about to break out, shit's gonna hit the fan and everyone's gonna knock each other out. And hey, look, I just picked a vibe out of it. I just got what it was about. Well, I doubt that it's actually about a bar fight, but it is the only song like this that creates a clear vibe, a clear picture, a clear feeling. And like Viva La Gloria Little Girl, and like Murder City, it's very alone in that regard, unfortunately. Now, the instrumentals aren't much to talk about, it's the vibe that carries the song. Although the guitar here is more raw than on other songs, and that's appreciated. Before I really get into the third act here, I just want to reflect on how I've barely been talking about the instrumentals, and that's because there's so little to talk about, and that's my number one flaw with this album, above all the others, is that the instrumentals are so meh. So unnoteworthy, so mundane. I can't pick them out and complain about them because they just pass through my head in one ear out the other. They're nondescript. They're unnoticeable. They're like an odorless, colorless, tasteless gas that passed through the room but doesn't make you sick. It makes your voice squeaky. You kind of notice it, and then it's gone up into the upper atmosphere. The most annoying thing to talk about when reviewing an album. You can't point out what's bad, because it's not necessarily bad to be boring. It's mediocre, it's passable, it's a C-. It's there. And it's hard to complain about that, especially since all Green Day albums have that to an extent. But this is the only Green Day album where that is the album. That's the vibe, that's the thing that carries over. All these songs try to chase different genres, but the only thing they have in common is that they do it in a generic, meh, and forgettable way. This album borrows so much from other genres, but it does nothing to make it its own. Yes, Warning borrowed from other genres, but every song was a strong, enjoyable experience to listen to. Here, I don't like listening to most of the songs. They're just there. They just exist. And that is so frustrating. And on that note, let's salve my pain with my favorite song on the album, The Static Age. The first thing See what this review is doing to my brain. The first thing you will notice about this song is the drum line. The second thing you'll notice is that guitar. Surprisingly Green Day, surprisingly punk, surprisingly energetic. It sounds like a Green Day song. If the mastering was a little better, if it was a little more on the forefront, then it could be really, really nice sounding. And the third thing you notice is that surprisingly, after another break from it, there's a bass line. And this bass line is surprisingly Mike Dirnt. Being a drama queen aside, I actually listen to the song on my own. I pull it out of the album and throw it into playlists with other Green Day stuff. It's a good song. I really like the vocals. Can you hear the sound of the static noise blasting down the stereo? Cater to the class and the paranoid. Music to my nervous system. Advertising love and religion. Murder on the airwaves. Slogans on the brink of corruption and visions of blasphemy. War and peace screaming at you. This song obviously is about hypersimulation, terrible advertising, all the flood of information you get in the modern age. The stuff you get online, the stuff you get driving down the street from electronic billboards, all the things fighting for your attention in the attention economy, just screaming at you, overwhelming you, and it all blends together to television static. The song paints a very clear picture and a very clear message, on top of being a fun pop-punk song. Hey, that's possible, be fun and nice to listen to, and portray a message? That's amazing. I wish they would have figured this out sooner on the album. Now again, this is another song which I'm guessing was written early on, and then they sculpted the album around it. There are weird static sounds in other songs which I think are supposed to call to this one, like this is some sort of staple in the themes of the album. And it's a good song to try to staple to, but ultimately, it's the only one that ever actually addresses it. It's like all the other attempts are just, hey, citation, see this song to get what we're talking about. My favorite part of this song, though, is when the character that I assume to be Christian starts singing at the top of his lungs. All I want to know is one goddamn thing, not what's in the medicine. All I want to do is I want to breathe, the batteries not included. What's the latest way that a man can die screaming hallelujah? It calls back to what was set up about him earlier in the album, about him longing for a simpler time, and makes it feel like his character had an arc, although there was never really an arc outlined for him. It's a nice idea, nice attempt, I guess, to bring the idea set up earlier full circle. And that's all I have to say about this song. Now moving on to the song which will make you all hate me, grab me up, tie me on a cross, and burn me. 21 Guns is an incredibly underdeveloped, underwritten song. I'm not going to say it's bad because it isn't outright bad. I do enjoy it to an extent. It's nice and dramatic, but the thing about 21 Guns is that once you start thinking about it, you realize it's not so good. The thing that really made me see this was when Revolution Radio came out and it had Still Breathing, and I realized that essentially Still Breathing is just 21 Guns redeeming itself. 21 Guns is a perfect illustration of the fact that having meh percussion from Trey and completely unnoticeable bass lines from Mike is a terrible flaw. Because, yeah, 21 Guns is a decent song. It's good enough. But just imagine if instead of the mastering being so empty and so often just stripping back to Billy so much and making the song sound so empty for so much of the long runtime, just imagine if sometimes, instead of it being empty, it was a reverbing, hollow, haunting bass line filling up the background. Just a few well-placed bass lines, just a few good drum beats from Trey would just flesh the song out so much. And it's such a long song, you wouldn't even have to do that right away. You could have the first chorus and first verse be what it is, but then the second verse you can start building up, adding a percussion, and then add bass line, and by the end you can have something huge and powerful. And while the guitar solo in the song is fine, imagine if before and after it was bookended by great performances from the other two main musicians in this band. Just imagine, because that song, you'll imagine, will be better than any song on this album as it is. Next is the two-part song American Eulogy, split into Mass Hysteria and Modern World. These songs are fiery and political, although again they don't really say what they're for politically wise unless you really read into it and already know what Green Day are about with their politics. But they are punky, and that's something good I can say about it. The two-part thing here is done kind of sloppily, almost like it was after the fact, and in an interview Green Day kind of hinted to that by saying that one part of the song was written before the other. But as it is, it's fine. The start of the song is the worst part. There they kind of try to shoehorn that very first minute-long song back in with a 30-second staticky guitar and a slightly changed version of it, but it's just pointless. They tried to do a full circle thing with that, but it's just more dead weight that they could have trimmed off for a tighter experience. I don't have much to say about the song itself except that it's closer to Green Day than most of the album. The bass line here is better, although it's still not stand out. And Mike Dirnt has a really fun singing break where we get to hear him flex his vocal cords, which is something I really wish they would do more. The songs are catchy, but in the grand scheme of things, I think might not be as good as people think they are. You see, after so much meh on the album, this song kind of fools you into thinking it's better than it actually is. Imagine sitting back, taking out a record labeled Green Day, and then listening to Bono for an hour, and then after listening to all of this Bono, suddenly it was The Offspring. And you're like, yeah, this is more like Green Day. This is closer to what I wanted. But then you sit back and you think, it's still not really what it should be. And I'm not setting super high standards for Green Day. I'm not saying it has to be as good as American Idiot or Dookie, but I'd like it to at least be good as 39 Smooth, at least be as good as the trilogy, because somehow the trilogy is better than this, and now I can hear the angry mobs gathering outside. I can tell that they found out my IP, and they're sending a SWAT team to kill me, but ooh, I've said it. It's out in the world now. The trilogy is better than 21st Century Breakdown. Anyway, we have one more song, See the Light. It starts with a sort of full circle, but this time it's a real full circle. It calls back to the title track, with actually having the same piano, only this time the piano sounds more like how it did on the demo than in the main album version, which is kind of weird. And instead of cutting into what was the second and third acts of the original song, this song sounds like if you just let the first act play out and see what it developed into. This song has the feeling of a conclusion without actually concluding anything. It's more of what I gather to be Christian going on a journey. From what I gather, he's given up, and maybe Gloria's with him, and they've given up on trying to find their place in society, and they're just trying to ride out the storm, maybe trying to find their own place, just trying to survive. But that's also what they were doing the entire album, unless there were stuff that happened, but I couldn't tell because it didn't actually tell me if anything happened, and there wasn't enough given for me to infer what happened. That's a mess, but again, taking it away from the story, it's a decent song. It actually has a grand feeling, and Trey's drumming here is probably the best it is on the album. It has a nice, huge chorus, although Green Day have done it better. It's fine. It's a good note to end on 70 minutes into an album. Wow. Well, that's every track. I've gone through them all. Now to try to kind of sort my opinions together and lay them down. 21st Century Breakdown, to say it one more time, is 70 minutes long, and almost every song on it is meh. I take out 4 or 5 songs from it, put them on a CD with a bunch of other music, and only listen to that. And it just puzzles me that Green Day would take 5 years and 70 minutes to make something that amounts to so little, leaves such a small impression. It leaves me with so many questions that I'll never get the answer to, but also never want the answer to. Is this album the way it is because Billy became an egotistical perfectionist and took over the project and ended up grinding away the little rough grooves that made it good until it was something that his drug-filled mind deemed to be good enough? Or was it that they never cared in the first place and slapped something together while doing drugs and chilling for 5 years? Because, not to be overly blunt or anything, but we know that Green Day were on very hard drugs when they were making this. Not to be that guy, but you probably shouldn't abuse prescription pharmaceuticals. It's not going to work out for you. It never does. I I honestly don't want to know which one is true. I'd love to hear what you think is true, if you think that either of those is true, or it might be a combination, or it might be something else. But it's just perplexing. And for one more note, I'd like to drive in just how perplexing it is by making a comparison to a scrapped song and a side project. You see, in 2007 and 2008, right before this album came out, Green Day became involved in a side project called Foxborough Hot Tubs. Now, Foxborough Hot Tubs was a small band made up of all the members of Green Day, including the touring members, and there were no members in it that weren't ever in Green Day, either as a main member or a side touring member. So in other words, Foxborough Hot Tubs is literally just Green Day, but trying to write a different type of music. And the type of music they were trying to write was homage music. They were trying to make homages to classic rock in the many forms it takes, stuff from the 40s, stuff from the 50s, stuff from the 60s. It had songs that sounded like Elvis. It had upbeat Saturday morning or a sitcom style theme songs. It had pretty much an example of any type of classic rock song you can think of on it. And it was rocking. If you ever listen to Foxborough Hot Tubs, you probably know what I mean, and if you haven't listened to Foxborough Hot Tubs, I definitely recommend it. Listening to any of that stuff, or seeing recordings of their shows from 2008, illustrates that, at least in 2008, they were full of energy and piss and vinegar, and passionately writing upbeat, punky music. The Foxborough Hot Tubs project has a great bass lines. The bass line on the song Mother Mary is so good that Mike even reused it on a Green Day song, Stray Heart. Yeah, listen to them side by side, it's the same bass line. In fact, the entire album Dose originally began as a second Foxborough Hot Tubs album. It sounds so much like what you'd expect from Green Day that it's perplexing that after taking 5 years to write this follow-up, Green Day apparently slapped the side project together while they were writing 21st Century Breakdown and just performed it quick, for no reason, before releasing 21st Century. There's a story circulating online that Billy wrote most of the album and recorded most of the demos before 2007, or during 2007 at least, before taking a break and going to Foxborough Hot Tubs, and then they quick returned to the album and wrapped it up before releasing. And that leads me to this little conspiracy theory I have. That originally, this album sounded more like the demo of 21st Century Breakdown and the scrapped song Lights Out, and that after leaving it to quick do Foxborough Hot Tubs and coming back, that Billy completely redid it with either re-recording the songs or remastering them. Now, that wouldn't be strictly new for Green Day. Dookie was recorded twice. They made the demos and then made a final version of the album, and then they weren't happy with that final version, so they scrapped it and did a second final version. And the second final version is the one that we all know and have listened to. They did it again with Warning, apparently. They had a version of the album that they did with their longtime producer, but they weren't happy with it, so they got rid of their producer and remade the album all on their own to nail the perfect feeling that they were chasing. And on both those albums, it worked out great. There are many of the demos from Dookie circulating online, so you can go look them up and listen for yourself what that originally would have sounded like. And I want to say that there's a leaked original version of Warning, although I might be, and probably am, entirely misremembering. But in both those cases, the reworking of the album worked out great. And my conspiracy theory here is that after working on this album for so long, from chasing this need to make a proper follow-up to American Idiot, Billy just wasn't happy with it. He felt the need to make another grandiose rock opera, but it was just sounding too much like American Idiot. So he took a break, he wrote some new music with a more laid-back feeling, which was Foxborough Hot Tubs, and then he came back, but the inspiration he was hoping to get to finish the project didn't come. So he just went with his gut and tried to do the easiest way to make it different, and over-polished it. Because Lights Out sounds a lot like the demo version of 21st Century Breakdown, and it sounds a lot like what Green Day usually sounds like. While Lights Out can sound a little generic, admittedly it's just a montage of the best of other Green Day songs, and the guitar line and parts of melody is pretty much a straight rip from Holiday. It's definitely a trace of what this album might have sounded like before being reworked. And if it sounded like that, it would have sounded a bit, or maybe more than a bit, like American Idiot. And maybe, in the end, Billy was just terrified, or maybe all of Green Day were just terrified of writing American Idiot again and getting themselves locked in a corner. So in a desire to not write American Idiot again, they made something that ended up being what many people feared American Idiot might have been upon hearing the words, Green Day made a punk rock opera. In the end, it's surprisingly ironic that this album, which has grand themes about static and chaos and disorder in the modern world, is a chaotic mess. With poor pacing, little substance, and confusing messages. And I realize that it's incredibly strange that the themes of the album are reflected in the album in such a weird way. I saw what I assume to be a shitpost, but which might not have been a shitpost, on Reddit once, that maybe 21st Century Breakdown is the mess it is because Green Day did that on purpose to portray their point. Personally, I don't see it. In hindsight, they could say that, and it sounds somewhat convincing. If you squint, if you concentrate hard, you can imagine them making that point. Yes, sometimes the politics in their music is poorly worded, or misguided, or just stupid, but I cannot see Green Day making their entire album bad just to portray how they see the modern world, just to portray this political opinion. And in the end, maybe this tacked-on idea about chaos and static was added when Billy realized that the album was an underwhelming, stitched-together mess, in hopes that maybe someday an edgy Redditor or edgy Tumblr user would see it and think, yeah, they did this on purpose. But I'm just not ready to believe that. Before I leave you, well, I hope you enjoyed this video on this long rant. I know that most people in the world and most Green Day fans will disagree with what I've said here today, but if you've made it this far, I thank you for hearing me out, and I'd love to hear your opinions on 21st Century Breakdown, as long as it's not a screaming echo that I'm just wrong and an idiot, and 21st Century Breakdown is the best album ever written. If you think 21st Century Breakdown is the best album ever written, and you have reasons for it, I'd love to meet you in the comments and talk about it. If you have any opinions on this album, I'd love to meet you in the comments. If you like this video, like it. If I'm an idiot, dislike it. And I hope to rant to you in a future video.